I never thought I was a very high maintenance person. That was until I decided to live out of my carry-on suitcase for 2 months. Now, I've watched many other videos on YouTube of people living out of their carry-on suitcase for far longer than 2 months. So I thought it would be a breeze. It wasn't. It came with its own struggles and challenges. Hello everyone, today I'm going to be sharing my experience living out of my carry-on suitcase for 2 months from October to December last year in 2022 in Europe. It was definitely a challenge, but it also taught me so much about myself and how distanced I am from a minimalist lifestyle. Today I want to talk about some of the lessons that I learned, tips that I figured out while trying to live more minimally, things that I learned about myself and the life comforts that I didn't realize how much I enjoyed, and what I would do differently if I were to do this again. First, let's take it back to what I was thinking when I was packing and what I managed to bring with me. When I first decided to travel for 2 months, I had a lot of mixed emotions. On one hand, I was excited at the prospect of exploring new places. On the other hand, I was a bit nervous about the idea of living out of my carry-on suitcase for 2 months. But I knew I wanted to keep things simple and not overpack. Spoiler alert, definitely overpacked. The first thing I did was make a list of all the essentials I knew I needed to travel. I included things like clothes, toiletries, travel documents, anything that I might need in those 2 months to travel. I tried my best to create a capsule wardrobe as well. This ended up with me just packing a lot of black clothing items thinking that they would go with everything. I definitely realized on this trip that I need to really learn what a capsule wardrobe is. When I was packing, I did find that I was struggling to fit everything into my suitcase. This did make me realize that I was carrying around a lot of unnecessary things in my life and holding on to things that really I didn't need. This has been a real eye-opener for me, and it has made me reevaluate how I look at shopping for clothes. And as I mentioned, having a capsule wardrobe is something I really want to move towards. I also really struggled with deciding what outerwear to bring, as I knew it was going to be rainy in Ireland and England, and I didn't know what to expect for Portugal and Spain in the cooler months of, November and a bit of October. So I was trying to figure out what jackets I could bring and fit in my suitcase or carry on the plane. And I also had a hard time deciding on what footwear to bring as well. Once I had finally fit everything into my suitcase and was ready to go, I definitely felt a sense of relief that I managed to fit everything into such a small space. I also felt extremely nervous that my suitcase was going to be too heavy as a carry-on to fit in the overhead apartment of the airplane as well. One of the biggest lessons that I learned while traveling with a carry-on was how to prioritize things that are important to me. I found that I was able to focus more on the experiences and people that I was with, rather than worrying about my belongings and how to get it from A to B. I definitely also learned how to be more resourceful and make do with what I had. One of the major benefits of traveling with minimal luggage for this long is how much easier it makes traveling through airports and public transportation when you only have to worry about your little backpack and your carry-on suitcase. It was a relief not having to lug around a heavy suitcase or worry about it getting lost in transit. I also found that I was able to move around a lot easier. I'm someone who even struggled sometimes with the small suitcase, but I definitely don't think I would have taken as much public transport if it weren't for the fact that I could easily move around when I just carried a carry-on suitcase. Now, let's get into some of the specifics that I learned while traveling for 2 months. In North America, I realized we are really spoiled with having dryers in our homes. I think, a large part of that, I know for living here in Calgary, Alberta, is that it's so cold. I don't know what you would do without a dryer for your clothes. But I definitely wasn't used to not having a dryer in some of these Airbnbs, like the one I had in Portugal and Spain. And because it was a colder month at the time where I went in November, washing the clothes and then not really being able to dry them outside due to it being rainy outside or cold and just hanging them up in the Airbnb, most of the time the clothes didn't dry. I know in Portugal our Airbnb was kind of damp inside, so it felt like a very first world issue for me to have clothes that didn't really dry properly and ended up smelling like clothes that had been damp a long time. Kind of like the wet dog smell is the best way to describe it. So I definitely learned how dependent I was on things like having a dryer in my home, how blessed I was to have that. And I think if I were to travel again, I would just find a way around this, maybe take it to public laundromat or something like that. But yeah, something I learned about myself that I didn't realize I would be learning on that trip. The showers can also be very small in Europe. I remember the shower being exceptionally small in our little Madrid Airbnb that I shared with 2 friends, and I didn't realize how much I missed having large showers in Canada where you can stand underneath the shower head without having to crouch or anything, and how much of a luxury that was to have that. Okay, getting into one of the lessons that I think was the major thing for me on this trip was that it was bold of me to assume that I would have Wi-Fi in every Airbnb and place I went to. I think we definitely take our Wi-Fi and even cell service for granted in Canada. In my Airbnb in Paris, the Wi-Fi was virtually non-existent. I ended up having to go to my friend's hostel almost every morning to use the Wi-Fi at the hostel instead. The hostel actually had a pretty good setup for people working abroad. And then, it was tough working in Paris for that reason because I couldn't do any of my work in my Airbnb. So I was super excited when I went to London to visit my friend Colleen. And then I realized that, she didn't have Wi-Fi set up in her apartment yet. So I thought, okay, I will just use the cell service and, use that for my Wi-Fi for a little bit. There was no cell service in her tower. I don't know if they just didn't build cell boosters when they built the towers because they seemed pretty new that she was living in. But then I spent most of my time in London running around trying to find Wi-Fi at cafes. And the cell service, I don't know if it's because the plan I was using was from Ireland or what it was, but it was really hard to get any good cell service in London walking around in general. It was quite spotty. So I definitely missed that part of Canada where I never really had to worry about cell service. And Wi-Fi was a lot easier to find. So cafe hopping became the norm for me in Paris and London, which leads me into my next point, which is to get used to running around looking for cafes for Wi-Fi. Whether it is rain or shine, you have to figure out where to go to get some Wi-Fi to do your work if you're working abroad. Definitely bring a good backpack and some good walking shoes, just so that you're comfortable enough to venture out and to find these cafes, whether it be a Starbucks or whatever is near you, to get the Wi-Fi to do your work. There were some days where I spent almost the full day camping out at a Starbucks to get my work done. So, talking about rain or shine, looking to find a cafe to do your work kind of leads me into another point, which is how much I loved my baseball cap that I brought and how much of a fan I am for caps now. I loved that I could pop on my baseball cap, run out into the rain. I was generally okay with a raincoat and a baseball cap. The baseball cap was amazing though. It really kept the water off my face. It was also great when I started to get sick on the trip or I hadn't washed my hair in a couple of days and I could just hide it with a baseball cap. So if you guys are traveling for a long period of time, I definitely recommend bringing a baseball cap, even if it's not a super sunny place. It was really great for the rain and I am a baseball cap fan now. Okay, so back to the topic of cell service. I think it's really important to get yourself a good phone plan in Europe, and usually they are quite affordable. We are heading to get myself a SIM card. The best phone plan I had was when I was in Dublin in Ireland, and this really nice guy hooked me up with a great plan that really lasted me most of my trip. Got them for like a month at a time, and it worked fairly well in England. As I mentioned, I had some troubles in London. It worked well in Paris, and it worked well while I was in Ireland having that phone plan. Then when I was in Portugal, I also got another phone plan, which wasn't as great because it did cut out on me before the month was up. So it's just important to try your best to find a good phone plan that works for you while you're in Europe as well. Another lesson I learned was how amazing it is to get back to your roots and to visit your family. I've talked about it a few times, but visiting my family in Ireland was one of the big highlights of my trip. Now that travel has really opened up more, especially leading into 2023, I highly recommend going to see family if you have family abroad and just making the effort to go see them. I think the time I spent with them was priceless. I also loved moments like walking along the beach near my grandparents' home and just remembering all the times I was there as a child. Things like that were just really special. Okay, so now getting to some more specifics about being a freelancer working abroad. A lesson that I learned was it's really important to set boundaries with your clients. Most of my clients were very understanding. I think some just kind of forgot that I was working abroad on a different time zone, and I really had to get better at setting a boundary of saying, like, look, I am available from this time to this time. You can't access my time all throughout the day because it may be nighttime for me if I'm in Portugal and you're in Canada. And I just think it's really important for you to set good boundaries right off the bat. I need to work on this when I travel abroad as a freelancer. I also learned how important it is to bring good headphones. I was worried about space, so I didn't bring like my big over-the-ear headphones with me on this trip, and I didn't have AirPods, so I just brought my little ones that I used to use for my iPhone. These were not great when I was working in loud cafes trying to take a call from my client. It was really hard to hear them. So one of the first things I did when I got back from my trip was to invest in some AirPods so that if I ever do this again, I'm going to be a lot more comfortable taking calls in public and being able to hear my clients. Something else that I kind of figured out along the way was it was actually really great that I brought a cloth suitcase. If you bring one of the hard case ones, I think it's a little bit harder to expand it when you end up buying something and running out of room in your suitcase to bring things home. I actually found it was such a squeeze bringing stuff back, even with my cloth suitcase, but I'm definitely thankful that it had more stretch in it to pack more things on the way back. So if you're someone who knows that you probably are going to buy some things while you're abroad and you don't have much space, the cloth suitcase carry-on, I think, was a really good idea. Another lesson that I learned was to remember to eat fruits or take vitamins while you're abroad. I got sick a fair bit while I was abroad, and I think it was because I wasn't eating regular meals. Like, it was kind of meals while I was out with friends or on the go, and I didn't take vitamins at any point, and I wasn't consuming a lot of fruit and veg daily, and I think it really took a toll on my skin and how I was feeling and my health. So I would make sure to maybe buy some vitamins when you first get to your next destination, and remember to take those while you're traveling as well. On to a positive note, if you're going somewhere like Europe, enjoy the museums, especially the free museums, the art galleries. There's so much to see. I would just try go to as many as possible because those were some of the favorite places that I visited while I was traveling as well. So as you can see, there were some ups and some downs while I was traveling for 2 months. Overall, it was a really positive experience. I think all the negative points that I mentioned were just things that I wasn't used to or wasn't prepared for. And I definitely realized that I was a creature of comfort during my travels. And I realized how much I enjoy a good dryer, a nice sized shower, good ventilation and washrooms, having a large sized room. You know, the rooms in Canada are really large. And also having more than 2 options of shoes or outerwear every day. So I definitely realized those were things that I missed. I am really grateful for all the places I went to though, and the Airbnbs that I stayed at. I really just wanted to make this video for anyone who's similar to myself that maybe didn't think about those things before traveling. They might seem really self-explanatory for anyone who's traveled a lot before, but for me, they were things that I didn't really think about while going to Europe for 2 months. I definitely think that this means I need to get out of my comfort zone even more though, and continue to push myself to travel more alone as well. When I got home, I went through my possessions and tried to clear out things that I hadn't used for a while. And I really want to figure out the whole building a capsule wardrobe and using that efficiently as well. I want to make sure my life is more simple. I don't need so many belongings, and I think this is why traveling is so important, because it teaches you these things about yourself, what you love, what you miss, and also things that you could do better. So that's all I have for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys all in my next one very, very soon.
If I could take you back to my youth, show you what I wish I knew.